So what we're going to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes on, this is a very short introduction to the topic, is kind of what are the basics of affordable housing. And I'm going to also refer to this purple flyer. So if you didn't get that, we'll make sure you get one before you head out of here today. So affordable housing, in the sort of capital A sense of the word, affordable, means that three things are going on. One is that it's regulated by some governmental body. It's either the local government, the state government, or the federal government. The next thing is that there's a long-term, what's called deed restriction. So it can't be just affordable this year. It's got to be affordable for multiple years, maybe 30 years, 50 years, maybe in perpetuity. And the third thing is that the occupants in affordable housing must meet some kind of income eligibility. So there are guidelines, and only certain people can live there. Affordable housing comes in two flavors. It's either public or private. And some of you are familiar with public housing because you may live in communities that have housing authorities, and that's public housing. Private housing, though, is everything else. And that can have been built by a for-profit developer or a non-profit developer. And some towns have what's called inclusionary zoning. Anybody from Hudson? All right, not a lot. But in Hudson, there's this big, beautiful new building called the Matrix. And a certain percentage of those units have to be affordable. So that's more and more common these days. If you see a building, a big building going up in your town, it may have an affordable housing requirement. So you should march into the management office and say, tell me about your affordable units. So as I said, one of the key things is that there are income limits. So if you have this purple flyer, most affordable housing is eligible to households at what's called 80% of area median income, which is kind of gobbledygook for 80% of the average, right? Sort of where most middle of the road folks are for the greater Boston area. If you live out in Springfield, this is going to be a different number, but close into Boston, this is the right number. So for a household size of 1, this means that your income cannot exceed $56,800. If you make $56,900, you're not eligible for affordable housing. And it's based on household size. So you start with what's your household size, and then you read across, and there's the magic number that you need to be under. Now, some affordable housing has different income limits. So your public housing authority probably has lower income limits than this one. So when you see a flyer or you read an ad in the paper, you got to kind of look and pay attention to those numbers because they might not be exactly these numbers. It's very confusing. Affordable housing is sort of designed to be confusing and to make it hard for you to apply to. But we're going to give you the secrets on how to apply tonight. So, below that in the purple sheet are some sample rents. Now, a lot of people look at this and say, what? That's the affordable rent? It is still kind of high. So a one-bedroom affordable rent is around $1,600. Now, they come up with that number because they assume that you're making $50,000 or $60,000, which is why you can afford the $1,600 a month rent. Now, we all know that's not how it works for a lot of people. So again, when you're looking at flyers and advertisements, you got to kind of check the numbers and make sure it's a number that you could, in fact, handle with your income. All right. Couple of other things as you're thinking about applying for affordable housing. You know, where do you want to live? It's good to start out with that list, but be open to considering other communities because affordable housing opportunities are few and far between. So you might say, I must live in Harvard. I'm going to pick on Harvard because I don't think there's any affordable housing in Harvard. No, that's not true. That's not true. There's a few. There's definitely a few. But you might wait 20 years before a unit comes up in Harvard. So you might need to think about, okay, I can actually live in a bigger area than maybe I thought about. And then most importantly, you gotta start early and stay in it, despite how depressing it will be at times. The only way to get affordable housing is to get your name on lists and to get your name into lotteries and get your name on more lists. So it's survival of the fittest. That's the truth. A lot of people don't get affordable housing because their name comes up on the list somewhere and your phone number's been changed and you forgot to tell them. So they skip you. They go on to the next person. So not only do you have to apply to a lot of places, you got to keep track of all the places you applied to. And if you move, you got to let them know, right? They need your updated phone number, email, and mailing address. Otherwise, you might miss an opportunity. So, sounds like fun, right? Everyone's going to go apply for affordable housing now? All right.
The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, looks at geographic areas throughout the country, and they determine an area median income for these different geographic areas. The deed restrictions use that area median income to determine who will be eligible to purchase the unit and also to determine the sale price of the unit. And generally, a deed-restricted affordable home will be designated for households earning not more than 80% of that area median income that HUD determined was that geographic area's income. The deed rider, this restriction, will affect your property rights in three main ways, in a number of ways, but three main ways. The first one is at resale. So the owner, once you purchase it, when you go to sell it, you have to go through an affordability monitor, which is, my office is one of those. So Metro West CD is an affordability monitor. And you have to go through that monitor, and they will calculate the sale price using a formula that's outlined in that deed rider, and then help you locate the eligible purchaser for your unit. Another place that it's affected is when you go to refinance. You also have to go through the monitor to refinance because there are regulations on how much debt can be put on these units. And then the last one is it restricts some capital improvements. For instance, you wouldn't be able to add a bedroom onto a unit like this because they are calculated by bedroom size. In most cases, affordable units are condos or apartments or single-family houses that were built by private developers, nonprofit or for-profit, generally built using public subsidy or under some sort of zoning regulation, like an inclusionary zoning that says if you build a certain number of units, a certain percentage of them have to be affordable, or under permitting regulations like Chapter 40B, which I'm sure everybody's heard of 40B, and that's basically the same idea. When the developer is allowed to build probably a larger development than they would have been able to because a certain percentage of those are going to be affordable, 20 or 25% of those. The units are designed to blend in with the market rate units, so they look exactly the same, but they are going to be designated affordable. So the first thing you want to ask, I'm sure, is how do I know if I qualify for one of these units? And there are eligibility things for eligibility criteria for home ownership units that are similar to rental, but there are some that are different. So there are income limits similar to rental, and generally the buyer can earn, like I said, no more than 80% of the area median income. There are some that are higher and they're called moderate income units, but in general, an affordable unit is going to be eligible to somebody who makes 80% of the area median income as determined by HUD or less. So for example, in the Boston metro area, which includes Stow, the current income limit for a 4-person household is $81,100. So if you make that or below, you would be eligible for one of these units. And your income includes things like your salary, your Social Security benefits, child support, alimony, things like that. That would all be included in your income. Unlike rental units, affordable home ownership units require you to meet an asset limit as well. So to qualify for an affordable unit, generally the household can have no more than $75,000 in assets. And assets are going to be things including bank accounts, retirement accounts, equity in a home. In some cases you are able to own a home to purchase, in some cases you're not. I'll explain that in a minute. Cash on hand, things like that. Those are your assets. For age-restricted units, so in general for affordable units, the asset limit is $75,000. For age-restricted units, so those are developments that are geared towards 55 and up or 62 and up, that asset limit is generally $275,000. And that's because we assume that you may already have a home that you're moving out of, and the equity in that home would put you over to 75. So for 55 and up developments, it's $275,000. Also, unlike affordable rental units, the asset and income limitation is only looked at purchase. So it's when you're purchasing it and projected out for a year. Whereas in rental, you have an annual certification to check your income and assets. With homeownership, you don't. It's when you purchase it and it's projected out for a year, and after that, we don't look at your income and assets any longer. Some of the other eligibility criteria include that, in general, you have to be a first-time home buyer. But where I mentioned about the 55 and up, we assume that people 55 and up may have already owned a home. So if you are 55 or older, you can have owned a home before. There's some other exceptions, but generally that's the one that most people are interested in. You also must be pre-approved for a mortgage if you're going to be putting a mortgage down, and in most cases you are, because again, in general, the asset limit is $75,000. So you're probably going to need a mortgage. If you have enough to purchase a house that's $200,000, then you're over asset. And you have to plan to live in the unit as your primary residence. You can't rent it or transfer it to a trust. You and your household have to be living there as your primary residence. So how is the affordable sale and purchase price determined? Most deed-restricted homes are priced so that the monthly household costs of this home ownership is affordable to a household earning 70% of the AMI. So even though you can earn up to 80% to be eligible, when we calculate the affordability numbers to set the purchase price, we assume that people are making less than that 80%. And so it's set to be affordable to somebody making 70%. And that's adjusted for your household size. There are different income limits based on household size. The monthly household cost calculation assumes a 5% down payment on a 30-year fixed competitive rate mortgage. It assumes the current property taxes, and it assumes the current homeowner or condo association fees. That's what goes into determining the affordability of a unit and then pricing the sale price to match. The area median income, for the area median income purposes, the Boston metro area includes the counties of Middlesex, Suffolk, Plymouth, and Norfolk. So Air, Boxborough, Hudson, Littleton, and Stow are all in that geographic area. Bolton and Harvard are part of eastern Worcester. But what that means is that a unit in Boston might cost the same as a similar sized unit in Cambridge or in Lynn or in Stow. So it's really based on that geographic area median income. And so, for example, you might expect current home prices currently, and this might change in about a month or two when HUD redoes their AMI calculations. But currently the range for a one-bedroom condo in this area is about $108,000 to $167,000 sale price, and a three-bedroom would be about $190,000 to $222,000. That's about the range. But one thing that you really have to make sure you understand is that you are buying a home, not an investment. This is not something that you're going to buy low and sell high. It is restricted to be permanently affordable, which means that the same formula that made it affordable for you to purchase is going to be making it affordable for the next person to purchase and keeping the price low. You might make some money when you sell it, you might not. And so you have to keep that in mind when you think about buying. When it comes time that you're interested in a unit and you want to apply for it, the first thing you have to do is fill out the application. And you have to take very much care in filling out these applications. You have to make sure it's complete. No blank spaces. If something doesn't pertain, say not applicable or something, because if we see a blank space and it leaves a question in our mind, we then have to go back and ask you if we have time before the deadline to get more information. So really they need to be filled out completely. And get it in before the deadline of any lottery that that is out there. If there's a deadline, get it in before that, get it in early, because there's no guarantee that the lottery agent is going to have any time before the deadline, because of sometimes the numbers of applications that come in. There may not be any time before the deadline to get back to you and say you're missing this item, and then if it's missing, you can't be put into the lottery, because only complete applications can be put into the lottery. If you get it in early, there's a chance the lottery agent will have a chance to look through it and say, oh, you're missing your 5 pay stubs, and then you can get that in and still be included in the lottery. The documentation that's going to be required to go along with the application, and there's a lot of it, it's going to be required for everybody in the household over the age of 18. And this is going to include income documentation, so that's going to be pay stubs. If you're an Uber or Lyft driver, you have to go into your account, get your statement so that it's similar to a pay stub. Benefit letters, if you're getting Social Security benefits, veteran benefits, anything like that. Child support or alimony. If you're self-employed, we're going to need to see your profit and loss statement so we can see what your income from your business is. Anything that's going to help us, these are things that are going to help us determine your household income for the year. Similarly, assets documentation is going to be required. Same thing. We need things so that we can determine what your household assets are. So that's going to be bank account statements, retirement account statements, documents showing what your equity is in a home if you're in that position where you're selling a home. You're also going to have to present a mortgage pre-approval letter. If you're taking out a mortgage for this, and on occasion people don't, and that usually falls into the $275,000 asset limit. Sometimes people have been able to sell a home for $200,000 and they're buying a home for $100,000, and they can do that. Generally, you're going to be getting a mortgage. We need to see the mortgage pre-approval with the application. And keep in mind, the loan cannot be co-signed by anybody who's not in the household. Then, if there is or there's expected to be more than one application for this house, there's generally a lottery process. And so there will be a deadline for the applications to come in. At some point after that, there'll be a lottery, and the eligible person, the first eligible complete application who was pulled from the lottery will generally be the person who will have the opportunity to purchase. I say generally because there are preferences for lotteries. And one of the preferences is a household size preference. So there is a preference for households that require the number of bedrooms. So if you have, and a couple is assumed to be using 1 bedroom. So if you have a single parent with 2 children, they would have preference for a 3-bedroom over a single person or a single parent with 1 child. There's also sometimes another popular one. Sometimes there's a local preference. And this would only be for new developments the first time the unit's being sold. Sometimes there is a up to 70% preference for people who already live or work or go to school in the community. And again, that's only new developments the first time the unit's sold. The sale price is fixed. It's not negotiable. That's set by that calculation in the deed restriction. And so when it gets put out there, that's what the offer will be. The person who wins the lottery makes the offer. It's that amount. That's not negotiable. And keep in mind that if somebody gives you a gift to help you pay the down payment or your closing costs, that's considered an asset for that asset calculation. So after talking about that, there are lots of pros and cons to purchasing an affordable unit. I have a couple of them that I want to point out, but there are many more. So one of the pros is your costs are generally more predictable when you own a home than when you're renting. Though property taxes and condo association fees will increase, it's generally a little bit more predictable than maybe the rent increase if all of a sudden the entire neighborhood has gone up and your rents go up a lot, or if the landlord decides to sell to a developer who raises the rent. And in that same vein, there's more stability when you own the home in the sense that there's no landlord who can decide they're not going to renew the lease this year because they're going to sell to a developer. And if you intend to put down roots in a community, you want to stay there long term, homeownership allows you to make those long-term plans because you know, excuse me, that you're not going to be, your lease won't be terminated at the end of the lease time. Also, again, just to reiterate, there's no income eligibility annual recertification kind of thing with home ownership, which there is with rental. So you don't have to provide your financial information to anybody every year like you would if you're renting an affordable unit. And something like this might enable you to live in a town or a community or development that might otherwise be financially out of your reach. And there are tax benefits, at least currently. There are still some tax benefits, mortgage interest, property tax deductions, things like that, and credit building, because if you pay your mortgage on time, it's going to help your credit rating, it's going to help you build credit. Or just if you have a strong desire to own. So those are some of the good things about owning an affordable unit. Some of the cons are exactly the opposite side of the coin of some of those. It is long-term, it's not flexible. It's going to take time and money to sell your unit. So if it's something that you're thinking you're going to want to move soon, or you might have to move soon, you might not want to buy. And also you have to look at the purchase costs, the down payment, the moving, your attorney's fees. They could eat up all or a lot of your savings and leave you with very little or no cushion for some other expenses that come up. So you want to think about that as well. And the expenses are real. You've got property taxes, which are going to only increase over time. You've got condo or homeowner association fees, which generally increase each year, and some of them are substantial. Sometimes the homeownership and condo association fees are reduced relative to the reduced purchase price of the unit, but not always. And so any future increases or special assessments will be your responsibility. The condo fee that is currently in place is part of that calculation that we do for affordability and going into the purchase price, but that's the current condo fee. Whatever happens later isn't reflected in that, and that's going to be your responsibility. There are also assessments for things sometimes when the roof needs to be repaired in the common area, and there are assessments to the condos. So you want to keep that in mind as well. General maintenance is going to be yours. So painting, upkeep, these kinds of things. If you need a new boiler, if you need a new roof, those are things that are now going to be your responsibility because there's no landlord. Some of those costs could be recouped when you go to sell, depending on what they are. Things that are structural, you know, like the roof, or to the that go to the systems, like the boiler. A depreciated amount of that may be able to be added back into your sale price, but it's not going to be everything, and it's still, that price needs to be affordable to somebody purchasing it, so it's possible that that will not be able to be added in. And then, of course, there's just the costs and the time that comes with selling your unit. And the one thing that you have to remember, it is a deed-restricted unit. And we are going to monitor it, whoever the monitor is going to monitor it for the duration of your ownership, which means if you go to resell, you have to go through the monitoring agent. If you want to refinance, you have to notify the monitoring agent. And there is an annual, although we don't do an annual recertification, we do contact you annually to remind you of your obligations to make sure that, you know, everything is still fine. And so that's still part of this because it is regulated. So the next thing you want to do if you're interested in homeownership, and I will take questions when I'm done, but if you're interested in homeownership, you can look at the websites that are listed in those brochures. There are many. Those are just a few. They list homeownership opportunities. Some of them you can search by town. There's no central list or central wait list or anything like that for homeownership units. When a new development has units to sell, they may have many, but when it's a resale, it's just anybody selling their house. When they decide to sell their house, they come up when they come up. So those are the websites that I would suggest you look at from time to time. Get pre-approved for a mortgage. If you're ready to buy, get pre-approved for the mortgage because you're going to have to put that in with your application. And then also, if you're open to rentals, you can join our Ready Renter program, which I know Jen talked about, which you sign up at Metro West website, and you will get a monthly newsletter that talks about rental lotteries that we know about or that we're handling, and then also some other information. For instance, this fair today was in the last newsletter. And then, as we always say, call your town planning boards, advocate for more affordable housing, call the state, advocate for more affordable housing. And that's it.
So, I wrote it all on one piece of paper. Every single thing you need to know is on this one piece of paper. And as you probably can guess from my earlier presentation, I'm joking. It's not that simple. If it were that simple, we wouldn't need to be here. So I'm gonna get some of these going around this way. If you could take one and pass it around. I'm gonna get them going over here. Take one and pass it around. So the big difference for you guys thinking about housing is you probably have more things, more decisions to make. And you have some options and choices to help you pick a path you want to go down. So starting at the top, the very first thing you get to think about is, do I want to rent or own my next home? because there's a whole universe of opportunities in the rental category, but there's a different universe in the ownership category. And guess what? They don't really talk to each other, right? So you're going to get on wait lists, you're going to go to websites that are rental related, different ones for ownership. Now you can definitely look at both. There's nothing wrong with looking at both, but it is eventually a decision you're going to have to make. Do I want to rent or do I want to own? Then you get to think about, do I want it to be age restricted or not? Do I want to live in what's called, quote unquote, 55 and up housing or not, right? So there are some very expensive 55 up condominiums, right? So you could live in a palace that's age restricted. And there's probably some fabulous 55 up rental housing that's also fabulous and palatial. And then, of course, there are lots and lots of good opportunities that are not age restricted. So that's another, okay, so ownership, rental, 55, age restricted, not. You got to figure that out. Then you got to figure out, am I looking for affordable housing or just market rate housing? Market rate housing is just expensive, and it is available to anyone at any time who can write the right check and have their driver's license and social security card. Affordable is going to take a lot more effort on your part. As I described before, it is going to involve, for sure, lotteries and wait lists. If you want to go the affordable route, as I mentioned before, there are income limits. So you must be at or below certain income limits to be eligible for this housing. And in ownership affordable housing, there's also something called an asset limit. So the asset limit for senior housing, I didn't write it down, it's $275,000, I think, about that. So that sounds pretty high, but if you're currently living in a house and you don't have debt on it and you go to sell it, you may actually now have too much cash and no longer be eligible for affordable ownership housing. However, you are likely to be eligible for affordable rental housing. So affordable rental housing does not have an asset limit. Last path you have to think about is whether you want to live in housing that has supportive services or no supportive services. And as you might guess, the more services, the more expensive. But there's quite a continuum. You know, there's everything from the fabulous community center and rec room and nursing staff, all the way down to a property management office who's got a lovely person in it who once a week will give you a call and say, check in, how's it going? So as you're going to visit places and you look at how much it costs, definitely one of your questions you need to ask is, what services are available on site to me? What am I getting for my money? And clearly, the older you get, in case you didn't know, the poorer you get and the more disabled you get, okay? I am the bearer of bad news. In case you didn't know that yet, it's coming. You are going to lose many of your skills and lose much of your money over the coming years. It's simply a fact. So you want to be in housing that hopefully enables you to stay there and be comfortable and not bleed out all your money as long as you can. So very important to consider the cost of the place. Can you live there comfortably and afford it and not lose all your money quickly? And does it have services that you think you might need and allows you to age there as long as you can? Now, before any of this, there are those challenging questions of, what am I going to do with my dining room table? What about, the boxes and boxes of books that you've been meaning to give away for the last 10 years? So So making this move requires a lot of preparation before you really can even begin to look. But starting to look will let you know what you're up against and what some of the constraints might be, like the 12-person dining room table you might not be able to squeeze into the 650 square foot apartment that has been offered to you. That's it for my formal presentation. She looks exhausted. She hasn't even started looking for affordable housing yet. She's exhausted.